Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we could take our seats, we'll kick off. Thank you for that. Welcome to session 4 of Automotive Logistics Europe, the Internet of Everything, Everywhere. We'll come on to that in a moment. First of all, for those of you who haven't been in the other room so far, my name is Christopher Ludwig, and I'm the editor of Automotive Logistics. It's a pleasure to be back here with all of you in Bonn. I hope you've enjoyed the day so far. We've had all the sessions I've been in, frankly, have been really great, very interesting range of presentations, talking about lots of different trends in the sector, and that's something we're going to come on to again now here. I would just like to kind of go through a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our panel and we start. First of all, you'll see in front of you evaluation forms. For those of you who for I'm sure very good reasons, but hopefully not, are leaving early and not coming tomorrow, please do fill them in and give them back to us before you leave. They're really important it's really important to us to have your opinion on this event. Everything from the program to the location to the setting, we really value the input, and we do build this conference around you, because it's, after all, for you and your industry. For those of you who will be staying to the end, as an incentive, we'll do a prize draw, and we do have a prize which we'll confirm to you tomorrow after we wrangle a free car at one of the car makers or something like that. I'm sure we can come up with something like that. At the end of this session, we're going to have buses going to the gala dinner. The gala dinner is once again at the Steigenberger and Koningswinter. It's a beautiful hotel, beautiful setting. We'll have some drinks on the hill there, and then dinner. And we have a special guest speaker, Perry McCarthy, who's for those of you fans of Top Gear, the British version, the original version, he was the original Stig, and also a Formula One driver. So we'll have some entertainment there for you. So please do join us tonight. It's not to be missed. Another thing, maybe very appropriate for a session called the Internet of Everything Everywhere, because the Internet is everywhere with us right now. We are streaming this session live to our global audience. And as Louis mentioned a few times, you can participate on that stream by asking questions, making comments, sharing your insights. But we're also going to do something a bit more interactive towards the end of this session. We have some survey questions that were put together from our gold sponsors, and we're going to be taking your opinion on it. And so we're going to ask you to log in. This is how you do it. That bit.ly link, that web link, is also in your program. So you can find that in your program, or bit.ly/ALEurope16 is the website, and you put your email address and your delegate number. The delegate number is the number right on your badge, beginning 175. So that's how you use your smartphone, use your tablet, laptop, however you want to log into that. You can do it now if you like to get a feel for it. But again, just a little warning that we're gonna ask you to participate in our own Internet of Everything a bit later on. So look forward to that. Okay, this session, just put it right through. We're looking at the Internet of Things. Obviously, that's referring to the revolution that's happening in a more connected world, the ability to buy things at a single click. The impact that is having, a tremendous impact that is obviously having in the supply chain, particularly for retail, e-commerce, things like that. But clearly there are big implications for automotive, perhaps an aftermarket side, perhaps eventually with increased visibility. There's big things that we think will come from this, and we've got a great panel of logistics experts who are going to share some insights into what's happening in their own organizations and what they also see coming for the future. So I would like to introduce. We'll have presentations from all three, and then we'll move to Q&A. So first up, we're going to have Michael Martin, who's the Vice President of Strategic Development for Global Automotive at DHL. We also have Michael Buenning, Managing Director of BLG Logistics. And last, but I'm not sure, we'll find out if it's least as well as last when he speaks, Ellis, the Vertical Market Director for Automotive at GEODIS. So look forward to the presentations, and I'd like to ask Michael now to kick us off.
Good afternoon. I just want to sort of set out a presentation that perhaps builds on a lot of the things that we've been hearing. We've been talking about connectivity, the way that cars are connected, and what I'm going to try and do in this presentation is pick up some of the themes and then hopefully translate in terms of what does that actually mean in terms of logistics? What does it mean in terms of how do we optimize the supply chain and how we do things a little bit differently? If first I just quickly introduce myself, it's the first time I've had the pleasure of speaking here. I've attended a few times. My name is obviously Michael Martin, look after Global Automotive, and my role is really in terms of looking at how does DHL supply chain tailor its services to best meet the needs of the automotive industry. And we see that there's lots of change and challenges, and all of the presentations we've been seeing, we've been picking up a number of these types of trends. The first is in terms of the growth. I think somebody was mentioning earlier that if you didn't have a business plan that was sort of saying that you're going to grow by 25%, you were going to lose market share. And we can see this all the time in terms of the number of cars that are being produced. At the moment, we've got 1.2 billion cars that are in use today, and the forecasts are telling us that it's going to be moving to 2 billion by 2035, and from that, 250 million are going to be connected. The numbers are actually staggering in terms of when you start looking at the data and you start looking at how we actually use this information. People have been talking about the geographical shift. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that the production is chasing consumption, and we're going to see that trend continue as we move forward. And then we look at technology. We look at what's going into the car. And this is going to be a lot about what I speak to today, but what we're actually seeing is that the decision to buy a car is based upon technology rather than the car itself. And when you talk to the consumers and you sort of say to them, what car models are you looking at, gone are the days when you used to go to a car and open up the bonnet and look at the engine. It's now about what's in the cockpit and what apps can you sync and what does the computer look like. It's completely different dynamics we can see coming into the industry. Obviously, there's regulations in terms of where you can produce cars and in terms of import levies, and obviously the customer. The customer is at everything that we see. We see this in terms of our customers being very demanding, obviously expecting great service, and we see it in terms of the automotive customers, in terms of what they expect and what they see is happening. And then we look at Europe. This is a European conference, and we can still see that the motor park is rising in terms of Europe. I think the question in terms of the vehicle park is increasing, and obviously that's because the average vehicle life is still going up in Europe in terms of the cars. Europe is still a very substantial part of the automotive industry, producing 19% of all of the cars, and we can still see that even in Europe there is still a shift between some of the western parts of European production moving to Eastern European production and low-cost sourcing. So even in Europe we can see there's a number of challenges. We talk about technology, and we talk about the number of parts that are going into a car. And I was on a conference call with some members of a technology company last week, and they were saying that the value add of technology in cars is now 36% of the value of a car is based upon technology parts. And if you go back 10 years, it was 20% percentage. And we see that there's an industry convergence. We see that technology and automotive, there's a convergence in terms of the suppliers and the characteristics of the supply chain. Now, through this presentation, you'll see every now and then a little brochure, and this is really just a little bit of research that DHL have carried out in terms of some of these themes. I haven't got the time to go through in every part of the detail, but if people are interested, on our intranet you can actually see these studies, and it just gives you a little bit more insight in terms of what's happening with the industry. Obviously, there's a diverse range of people now entering the market, and we see this in terms of new suppliers, people coming into the industry. And obviously, with all of this, it's more sequenced parts in terms of the supply chain. The more that a car is bespoke, the more the options are being chosen, the more the sequencing and this complexity of the supply chain will change. So, we have the complexity from technology. We obviously have shorter product cycles. Technology typically has shorter product cycles than cars. What does this mean in terms of how we then balance the supply chain in terms of a car cycle of 6 to 7 years and technology cycles that typically can be anything between 6 and 18 months? What is going to happen in terms of upgrading the technology in cars to keep them fresh? We have new people coming into the industry. We seem to be getting lots of rumours now in terms of Google, in terms of Apple. We see this week in the news that GM has got cruise automation in terms of looking at automated driving systems, and Ford, I believe, are setting up is it Tech Mobility, a subsidiary which is in Silicon Valley, looking at terms of how they can sequence the movement of people, like Uber, an internet movement. So we can see that there's a lot of new people coming into the industry doing different things. And I think it was mentioned earlier that the parts, when we look at technology, typically are very high value. And when you look at the supply chain, and it might not necessarily be sourced next to where you're producing your cars, you're going to need a completely different type of supply chain to bring it all together. And then we come to connectivity. I asked a question earlier in one of the sessions in terms of who owned the data in terms of the car and when it's being moved. But we can see that data from cars is really going to be used in a number of really useful ways. You obviously got remote diagnostics in terms of being able to see when cars are going to fail and to obviously aid them in terms of repair. I'll come on to a little bit further in terms of maintenance on demand, the principle of using the connectivity to actually be proactive in keeping vehicles on the road. But I see the data and connected cars, it's got to be, in terms of the OEMs, a fantastic opportunity to lock customers into their brands. Because obviously, if you can get into the car, see what needs in terms of servicing, it's going to give you an advantage over the independent dealer network. So I see connectivity really being a trend that could actually drive profitability for OEMs. So we look at the layers of complexity that we have. And when we sort of see the supply chain, we've got inbound movements, we've got finished vehicles, we've got aftermarket. And within all of these types of activities, there's so many different things that can happen in terms of data transfer and moving information and physical goods. We have tiered suppliers, we have factories, we have launch activities, we could have retail movements. And then on top of that, we start looking at all the things that are going to be moving, and we look at all of the data and how it all sort of comes together. And on top of that, we've got all of the things that we could be moving. It could be cars, it could be information with people, it could be smartphone applications. Every one of those gets connected. And when you start sort of connecting everything together and looking at how it all builds, you get something that looks like this. Now, I think it looks a little bit like this. How do you actually make sense of all of the data, of all of these information flows, and bring it together? And this is really going to be now the crux of this presentation. It's going to be sort of saying that we can use this data effectively. We can actually get competitive advantage by harnessing some of this. And this is how, in terms of DHL, we try to approach some of these problems. The first thing, and I think it's been mentioned earlier by some previous speakers, it's increasing the need for standardization. You have to make sure that you've got common ways of approaching these problems on a global basis. And we do this in terms of trying to develop what we call replicable solutions. You've got to have things that you don't reinvent the wheel, and you can apply logistic processes or ways of doing business in different markets. But this is easy to say. It is difficult to deliver. And the reason it's difficult to deliver is that you need to recognize the infrastructure of the different markets. You always will see this when we even look in Europe and we look around the world. Having abilities in terms of road networks, ports and things, they're all of different standards and levels of evolution, and they're not always there. We've got a former colleague of ours in the audience today who sat on this stage last year, and he was talking about the skills requirements of the industry. And this is another area which is very, very important to us. We have got, in our automotive industry, lack of consistent skills in all geographies. And I bet everybody out here is, in terms of recruitment, in terms of searching for talent, has had the issue in terms of being able to identify the right people to deliver consistent growth and operational excellence in different geographies. And this really comes down to the last point on this slide. It's got to be about collaboration. No one provider can provide everything that you need in every single geography. You have to work with others. You have to make sure you collaborate and work effectively. And a lot of that's going to be coming through in terms of how you share data and how you share information. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to optimize. So we see, in terms of the complexity from the connectivity, five areas of improvement that we can make. And the first one is in terms of maintenance on demand. So if people haven't come across this concept before, it's really sort of looking at high asset usage vehicles where downtime gives you a disproportionate cost. And what we've been doing is working within the industry to develop vehicles in a collaboration with Volvo that when they actually need to be repaired, you proactively replace parts before they fail. These types of concepts are very well known in technology in terms of the sectors of replacing servers, in replacing disk drives, and it's something now that we're building into trucks to give increased uptime. And what we find that you'll be able to do is that obviously you can keep trucks running to a more efficient level. You obviously increase the uptime in terms of the asset, and by doing this you're improving the safety and the vehicles. So it really is one of those types of processes which we see could actually move into high-value automotive cars as well, because I think there will be a certain segment of customer that will be prepared to pay premiums for this type of maintenance and sort of replacement of parts before they actually fail in the future. The second is what we call the predictive supply chain, and this is really sort of looking at past patterns and using that data intelligently to actually optimize what you're doing. And we see this a lot in terms of aftermarket. If we go back, say, 5 or 10 years in aftermarket DCs, the strategy typically is that you had a country, you put a big DC in it, and you basically used overnight type next day deliveries to provide dealer services. What we've seen in terms of the increase in terms of data that we've got from customers is that we've got more frequent, smaller deliveries responding to customers on a more through the night, same day type basis. And we've seen that by looking at data, by looking at stock holdings, we've been able to change networks into much shallower levels of stock holding, a lot closer to customers, all coming through the same principles of having predictive supply chains. And we've seen that when we've worked with customers and we've looked at their inventories, you can basically reduce inventory by 30%. And once again, it's just about being smart, isn't it? If you go into winter, you know you're going to get more crash repairs, you're going to need more light clusters, potential bumpers. So it's about moving your inventory and stock levels, potentially with weather data, potentially through seasons. And it's really just sort of working close with customers. And we're working with a number of universities to actually see how can we harness data to actually then predict and correlate future demand. We see that as very, very exciting. And then real-time optimization. I think one of the speakers, the speaker from Kia, I think it was Carlos, was talking about having an app that woke yourself up early to miss the traffic. We're not talking about doing that, but what we're talking about is that one of the biggest costs in logistics is the cost of a vehicle and the cost of it moving. Every time that we can get that vehicle avoiding traffic jams, avoiding getting caught up unnecessarily, we can create more value. And we use real-time tracking and optimization all the time in terms of making sure that the vehicles are moving and using those technologies. And then we've got technologies such as what we call DHL Smart Truck, which is actually where we have stakeholders or people that have got apps in their vehicles that actually give us real-time visibility of traffic conditions. Perhaps we've got some with taxi drivers, so you can see which routes taxi drivers are taking, and then we can actually then start measuring traffic patterns to optimize our vehicles, obviously based upon legal routes that we can take with our vehicles. But we see this as a really, really sort of a real value that we can take that data and get something out of it straight away. I've spoken about supply chain resilience at a few conferences in the past, and this is for people that are not familiar with the concept. It's about taking your complete supply chain and visualizing it on a map. And then from the supply chain, you're then looking at potential risks to that supply chain. So it could be risks in terms of weather, It could be risks in terms of political risks. It could be social risk in terms of potential strikes. And what it does, it gives you a real-time weighted average of what's happening with a supply chain in terms of potential disruptions. And we've seen that 93% of companies are not prepared for disruptions. If something happens in terms of a catastrophe or a worldwide event, you typically will get people say, well, what does that mean to my supply chain? You know, what's going to be happening now? And this tool allows you in real time to be able to see straight away what's happening in terms of your flows and movements. And it basically gives you the ability then to be able to change and adapt your supply chain to meet those disruptions. And finally, end-to-end visibility. Yeah, we'd say about how do we get the visibility and bring it all together. There's 637 million shipments are moved with the Courier Express market, where we're moving smaller shipments and we're moving them across the geographies. How much time do we actually waste checking to see if something's there in terms of logging on, employing people to monitor and things? When are we going to actually let go and trust the integrated data in terms of allowing it to happen and allow the systems to start generating the potential problems? And we see this in terms of one of the breakthrough areas as we move forward. It's got to be in terms of embracing how we link the technology together and reduce waste in terms of unnecessary checking and unnecessary sort of following up of movements. And really, sort of in essence, you know, given sort of 5 good examples in terms of how we can use the data, how we can sort of integrate things in a different way. But if we do harness the data, it will drive more efficient asset utilization. I typically look at a car, and this is always the question that always, this is a barroom sort of discussion. In terms of an asset, you know, what percentage of time do we think on average we use our car in terms of time as a percentage of utilization? And when you actually look at it, we use a car potentially mostly about 5% to 4% of its time. As an asset, it's used 3 to 4% of the time. And when typically for us, it's our second most expensive thing that we buy. So when you actually logically look at it, it's we use it 5% of the time and we buy it. So it's obvious that the new models that are going to come through in terms of ownership and mobility are going to be challenging that, because that doesn't seem to make sense, does it, in terms of the logic. But efficient asset utilization in terms of vehicles, in terms of cars and everything, it's got to be the future way of moving things forward. And from that, it's going to be the new business models. And at DHL, we're not here to, you know, we can't predict the future. We can't say exactly what's going to be happening in terms of whether it's going to be electric cars or whatever. But what we can see and what we always try to do is use our technology, support the supply chains as best we can, and give visibility. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Obviously giving us some very concrete and tangible examples of things like big data or data mining, and what some of the digital tools that, digitalization of the supply chain could mean for our business and indeed some parts of our lives. Plenty to return to there in the Q&A. Next up, giving us a bit of a perspective more from the finished vehicle logistics side and what digitalization will mean there, is Michael Buenning from BLG and also a board member of ECG.
Yeah, good afternoon to everybody. I have 2 hats for this presentation. The first one is the Managing Director of the BLG Automobile Logistic, and the second is as a board member of the ECG, of the Association of the Service Providers for the Complete Build-Up Car Logistics. I'm now 31 years in the sector and being busy in different operational groups of companies of the group. And BLG Automobile is one of the founding companies of the ECG. And fortunately, I was able to follow up from the very beginning. And we always had a seat in the ECG board. And now I have, beside that, also the responsibility of the EU affairs. And this brings me to the topic, why it is still not possible for the logistics sector in Europe to use e-documents. Why it is obviously not possible to convince all member states of the EU of the importance and necessity of introducing an e-freight document. Before I start with this topic, I will give you a very short overview about the activities of the BLG Group. The BLG Group consists of 3 different pillars, which means the automobile logistics, the contract logistics, and the container logistics. In terms of automobile logistics and container logistics, we are playing a major role in Europe. And in terms of our contract division, we are quite diversified. Here we are working for companies like Volkswagen, like BMW, Mercedes, IKEA, Siemens, Schiebo, and others. Within the complete build-up car logistic, we are organizing port terminals like Bremerhaven, which is besides the Bruges, the biggest terminal in Europe. We're doing truck transportation, rail transportation, and also transportation on the River Rhine and on the River Danube. We are able to provide complete supply chains from a source until the final consumer with our own assets. Here you will find some facts and figures of our automobile logistic. We handle every year about 7.5 million vehicles. Out of this, around 2.3 million just in Bremerhaven. This is, of course, by far our biggest operation. So now coming to our today's topic, why it is still not possible for the logistics sector to use e-documents. We as BLG are transporting about 1 million cars every year. We don't need for every single car as freight paper, but in total we will reach around 2 million pages of paper every year. But this is only our share of the whole European automobile logistics. Reaching this year a total automobile production of about 16.5 million cars, we can estimate 33 million pages of papers. This represents about 135 tons of paper. If I believe a very smart web page, we need about 200 trees being able to provide our necessary paperwork. But this is only the automobile industry. We all together are transporting much more goods every day, and I'm afraid we need quite some forests to just print our freight documents. This is not necessary anymore because we learned the whole day that the technical state of the art is there. We only need to do it, but we need also security. Besides that, we are under enormous price pressure from the industry, and we need to achieve more and more efficiencies. Perhaps this is not in line with further employments, but we can't ignore the digitalization of our sector. Still, we have some obstacles. What about the legal situation according to the CMR Convention? Paragraph 5 of the CMR Convention is regulating a consignment note in paper form. But no problem. In 2011, an additional protocol of the CMR was adopted. This so-called e-CMR protocol should organize and regulate the usage of electronic CMR labels. So far, only 8 EU member states ratified this protocol, and believe it or not, Switzerland as well. Unfortunately, Germany is not under those 8 countries. Due to the fact that we are not able to use e-CMRs, due to this fact, we are not able to use e-CMR documents, not for national transports within Germany and not for international transports, as long as you touch a country which so far didn't sign this protocol. In reality, it means we are not allowed to use an e-CMR for transports from Germany to Denmark. the Netherlands, or vice versa, even if Denmark and Netherlands signed this protocol already. On top of that, it doesn't make sense to have both e-documentation and paper form. Therefore, I like to ask everybody who is able and who is willing to support the transport industry. Please make sure that this protocol will be ratified by every EU member state. We don't need a patchwork rug, we need a European-wide and quick solution. Coming to the German case study, as all this is regulated in the German commercial code, so-called Handelsgesetzbuch, this used to be and still is the basic regulation for issuing transport documents. A new regulation were added to the code in April 2013 so that electronic documents are permissible under German law. However, the e-document is only permissible if authenticity and integrity of the records are ensured. Very important is that the e-document must ensure the equivalence with the conventional form of transport document. I guess here we have quite some gray zones. The German government is entitled to regulate the details of the electronic transport documents with a governmental regulation, but this is unfortunately not yet available. Due to the missing regulation, it is not advisable so far for transport companies to use electronic transportation documents. Just give me one reason why private companies should bear the risk for the very unclear situation. We already have to cover the risk for not being able to achieve more efficiencies using e-documentation. Coming now to the receipt to the proof of delivery, the German Commercial Code and the CMR do not provide special rules for a proof of delivery. Our freight forwarding standard terms and conditions, these ADSP, state that the carrier must require a receipt as proof of the delivery by the recipient. However, also the ADSP do not provide particular requirements. Let's put it together. Electronic receipt, for example, on a tablet is legally possible. Will it have the same value as paper in case of court proceedings? How to secure a regular recording and no manipulation of the original? Will a printout on an electronic receipt have the same probative force? Several requirements, be it on the legal side or be it on the operational side, needs to be fulfilled to avoid any disadvantages. If we are using electronic receipts, we need to have a file protection system that ensures the receipt against subsequent manipulation. This system should also have a logger that records every step of the system. This means further IT development, which is of course no problem. It is normal behavior to develop such special requirements, but we need a clear structure and a very clear regulation. If we talk about rail transport, we are facing same problems. There's an international regulation in Europe. CIM regulates also the rail freight documents. Even here, we have a so-called e-CIM, which would allow organization paperless rail transports. Unfortunately, also here, not all EU member states accept the e-CIM. The first step must be realized very soon. At least we need the European-wide acceptance for e-CIM in connection with transports within the European territory. I strongly believe that the operational side is ready and is willing to proceed, but we need to overcome the obstacles from legal and political sides. Certainly, there are various available topics using the e-CIM. Of course, these arguments are applicable for all modes. For example, it's difficult to lose an e-document, and as everywhere, you are able to save time and money. We also need to see further potential values using an e-CIM for international transports. If we are using different modes of transport and one electronic input will be supervise the whole supply chain, this is definitely create synergies. Or using same database for customs issues. Fortunately, DG Move and DG Tax in Brussels are at least in the process of discussing this. Let me explain the advantage of an ECIM. Train transports from and to China become more and more popular. We learned this morning. If you use maritime transport, you need about 40 to 45 days for these 11,000 kilometers. If you use train transports with historically paperwork, you need around 20 to 23 days. Not bad, but if you use rail transport with an ECIM, and for the Russian and Far East region, the so-called ESMGS, you can shorten the lead time by almost 5 days. Again, synergies. But what's happened with truck transports? What has happened with truck transport is also valid for rail transports. Quite some obstacles. Not all member states recognize ECIM, and the electronic signature on an ECIM is not the same towards insurance companies, courts, and authorities. Perhaps Orpheus could be the solution. Orpheus is an information system operated by rail data. Rail data, again, is working for almost all major rail companies. This system coordinates the ECIM data between the railway companies involved. What can be done by the member states? How can they support to make ECIM happen? First of all, ECIM must be accepted by all member states. An electronic signature must be equivalent as on paper form, and of course must be also possible for transportation of dangerous goods, which is not the case so far. Last but not least, coming to the maritime transport. The EU Reporting Formalities Directive, in short RFD, will simplify and harmonize administrative procedures and reporting requirements for all carriers calling EU ports. More or less, 1 year ago, all member states should have implemented systems to allow electronic submissions and receptions of all necessary and important informations. Here we are talking about the national single window. However, this will not replace the necessary freight paperwork. But believe it or not, even here we have single solutions and we are far away from any European-wide system. Sometimes there are different systems in place within one member state. We need a European-wide directive to move from national single window to European-wide window. To go this way will obviously take a while, but we should proceed and by far not giving up. The WSC, the World Shipping Council, and the ECASA working on a concentration by sending out questionnaires to get all requirements. A lot of discussions are going on. Quite some working groups are busy in order to proceed with the important topic. Unfortunately, political miles are not so quick as we want. Most probably we will find a midterm solution for electronic freight documents. But what about electronic bill of ladings? We all know that the C bill of lading is a tradable document. Can this become electronic version ever? The Digital Transport and Logistics Forum was created in April 2015 by DG Move, especially to support the European Commission in the exchange of electronic informations in the field of transport and logistics. ECG is one member among 110 others. We have a very close ear to the work of the Commission and are able to react immediately. The working field is wide and challenges are variously. The first plenary meeting in regard to recognition of e-transport documents results into the fact that a new working group was established. This group is headed by the RIU. The major problems are not based on operational level, but more on the shoulders of the member states. The overall understanding was the conclusion of the first plenary. If we will not develop a European-wide regulation platform, and I repeat, every member state will give full support, we unfortunately will fail in becoming more efficiency in our transport systems. And we need solutions soon, and not only in 10 or 15 years' time. As a conclusion, we have to realize at this stage that the use of electronic transport documents in Europe is still not advisable, unless the governmental issues are regulated in the details of electronic transport documents. I very much hope that this will come up in a not too distant future. We don't want to be pawn in the hand of different political parties and different ministers. If necessary, we need to increase the pressure to all member states to hurry up. Under the CMR conventions, eCMR would only be workable if the eCMR protocol from 2011 would come into force. It would therefore be essential that all member states ratify this additional protocol. I have a dream that one day we will have one window in Europe to insert all necessary data, and all different means of transports will issue a e-freight document, and all associations, legal offices and parties involved will be connected to organize single-source transport or intermodal transport without issuing just one piece of paper. Thank you very much, and questions later.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that. I mean, in some ways, it's perhaps a bit discouraging if we try to envision a supply chain which is completely connected and, between consumers and suppliers and factories and providers, and it's all organically moving, but yet we somehow can't even eliminate some basic paperwork right now. So it shows a little bit maybe the road that's still ahead. But obviously, it's quite encouraging that ECG and the companies involved are obviously pushing for this as it's an important piece of the puzzle here. Also, I appreciate the quote from Dr. King's lesser-known speeches on vehicle logistics back in the 60s there and his dream of eliminating paperwork. Our final speaker before I move to the Q&A is Mark Ellis from GEODIS.
Is it up there? Yeah. Okay, first, I want to thank so many of you for staying the distance, still being in the room at this time of night. When I was asked if I wanted to speak on this session, I said I'd love to, as long as it's not the graveyard shift. And of course, I am between you and the bar. So I've prepared 300 or 400 slides. We'll get through them quickly, together. I'm expecting lots of questions as we go along. So, before I start, one of the things I'd like to say is that every time I've come to this event, and I've been coming to this event since its very first one, I've not been every year, but I've certainly been to most of them. And I've been in all the continents to the various events they have. And I have to say that I tend to find something new at almost all of them. I found something new at this one before I even got here, and this is a first. So I just want you to imagine saying to your good lady, hey, it's your birthday coming up. I'm gonna take you away for your birthday. Oh, that's nice, that's nice. Yeah, I'm gonna take you to Cologne. There's somebody at the back of the room who's squirming here now, by the way. I'm gonna take you to Cologne and we'll fly into Cologne. Well, I like Cologne, that'd be great, she says. Actually, we're not going to Cologne, no, we'll go to Bonn. We've been to Cologne, we'll go to Bonn, but there's some nice art galleries and there's some nice buildings in Bonn. Oh, yeah, I'd like that, she says. And I'll be at the Automotive conference while you enjoy them. And one of our guys in the back of the room who's trying to hide away has left his dear wife upstairs or out in an art gallery while he attends this. So, Chris, Louis, your event is more important than his wife's birthday. Now, I couldn't do that. having said that, it's always my wife's birthday when Detroit is on, because they always choose that week, because they know it's her birthday and they think I'll get me in trouble and try it then. But no, that was a first for me. But anyway, yeah, thanks everyone for staying the course. We've not got too long. I haven't really got 300 or 400. It's more like 250 or something like that. So when you're asked to speak on something and you look at the programs that we've had today, I think there's two ways of going about this from my perspective. I can try and appear smarter than everybody else in the room, or I can try and do something a little differently and maybe give a little bit of food for thought. I think if those who know me and have known me for a long time knows which way I'll be choosing of that. So option 2 it was, because I'm certainly not going to try and compete with the intellect of this group in the room or even of the panel that I'm sitting with. So firstly, a couple of key facts about GEODIS. We're allowed to put a couple of slides up about that. So for those of you who don't know us, we're part of SNCF, which is French Railways, which kind of means that I'm, I guess, owned by the French Minister of Transport to some degree. GEODIS is a 7.8 billion euro company within logistics, which makes us one of the larger ones on the planet, but certainly not quite the size of my illustrious colleague on the panel there. But we've been growing extremely quickly in the last few years and getting away from our French roots and traveling around the world. And we've made a €1 billion acquisition earlier this year in North America, and I think what you'll see now is in the coming years, as we show this graph time and again, that the dependence on Europe will be getting less and that our growth in APAC and the Americas will be getting more. So 67 countries, 120,000 people that we have working for us with our own organization and our associated partners. And that to us, we seem to be doing okay. So we cover end-to-end supply chain solutions, as does most of our illustrious competitors in this event, from point of origin to point of concept. And it's interesting that with all of the technology and all of the information that's available to us and everything that we can get from all of our customers, there's what we still find to this day within automotive is there is more people have seen a Yeti than have seen an accurate production forecast from the automotive industry. So that's a little food for thought about how we're able to bend over backwards and to enable ourselves to work to the rules. So anyway, the Internet of Everything everywhere. By 2020, there will be 50 billion interconnected things in the world. Things. And I've actually had a look into this. And whilst I would agree with 250 million connected vehicles, what you find is that if you look at various different research sites, that this 50 billion is a very contentious number by 2020. And what I actually found was that it spreads from 50 billion, which is the numbers that Chris and his team managed to find in their research. And yet the lower end of the scale, Gartner research, they actually are saying it's 25 billion. But really, does it matter when we have that kind of number? Because these are numbers now that's beyond comprehension. These are not even telephone numbers, they're beyond that. It's the number is of such a size, you have to think how many noughts are involved in it. You also have to wonder if it's what used to be a UK billion or an American billion. So I'm going to guess that everyone in this room would be taking the American billion now, which seems to be the common concept for that. But what we do agree is that there's going to be 250 million connected cars. So my question is, connected to what? But let's hold that there for a second. Let's hold that thought. What I want us to look at first is the evolution as to how we actually got here today. Because this journey didn't happen overnight. I think it's possibly fair to say that it started 1946 was the first official computer, ENIAC. It was based on Alan Turing's design, and he did a lot of work to help complete it. It was his digital process, which he had used as a code breaking. But this could actually solve a number of mathematical problems. This was what we now call a calculator. And this was the first, and that is the actual picture of it, and that's about half of it, because the other side of the room has about as much information there. So anything, the amount of information that you can have on a basic calculator, That's how much size and store we needed to do that 60 years ago. So what happened next? Well, we're not going to be reading this slide, but how did we get to the internet? 1961, a gentleman called Licklider started to look at this, and it's fairly well accredited that he was one of the main instigators of developing an internet. And then he worked in collaboration with some other gentlemen in California, and this worked its way through UCLA until 1969. And in 1969, the first message, so 8 years later, after the concept of the internet, it took 8 more years before they sent their first message. And the first message they sent was supposed to be log on. And the first message they actually sent was LO, and then it crashed. So the first message that was sent on the first internet failed. And then the day after it was repaired, and that was the beginning of what we are today. So, well, what happened after that is then we start to look at where, the next thing for us to get towards connectivity and the connected car, we're going to need not just the internet, we're going to need a World Wide Web to display it upon. So the creator of the World Wide Web is widely regarded as being Tim Berners-Lee. And his ideas started in the 80s when he worked at CERN. So those wonderful people behind the Hadron Collider actually started life trying to develop the World Wide Web, or their research people did. And then he carried it on and his idea into 1991. And what he was able to achieve on that was nothing short of miraculous, considering that was the big step to get us to where we are today. And in 1995, this was then the internet as we knew it, which had been working within the US for some governmental facilities, allowed the license for the internet to be commissioned on a global basis. So, from 69 to 91, how it grew. On the left-hand side, you see the internet as we knew it when it first was launched in 1969. UCLA, a couple of places around California. There was actually just 4 hubs. There was only 4 people connected on the global World Wide Web on the internet in 1969. And by 1991 for the US, that was the map for the US. So they could just about get across the country. They could almost go up and down the country. But that's when you think about what we are today and the spaghetti slide that was put up before, which is really about I agree with that, by the way, except the only thing wrong with that spaghetti was it's not just a plate full of it, it's an absolute minefield of it. There's so much of it. But no, this is where we came from. So, we've now got the internet, we've now got a World Wide Web. So, what is a connected car? Any ideas? We've seen some things today. Is it data? Is it information? Well, the definition is the presence of devices in an automobile that connects devices to other devices within the car or vehicles and or devices and networks and services outside the car, including cars, homes, offices. Okay. Isn't it also connected to the person behind the wheel? And I think that that's an ominous omission from this definition, which is the industry standard definition for a connected car. When this was first envisaged, the future smart car, and you see that beautiful little Porsche there, which I hand drew, it was about entertainment, it was about content, it was about some sort of radio operations and connectivity to get back to speak to people. And then it went further into the telematics and learning about the information about the vehicle itself, and I'm sure now we all get low pressure on the tires and warning lights on the oil, and this isn't working. And I just got told on my way to the airport yesterday that my rear brake lights on the right-hand side had failed, so it needs a new bulb when I get back. So all of this information, cruise control, the automatic gearboxes, and everything like this is what's become part of what we know as the connected car when it was first envisaged. But I think what you can see is it's been around actually a lot longer than that. In fact, when Louis and Chris came to their first conference, there's a picture of them here in their connected car. And you can see, if you look closely, at Chris's arm there. And if you're majoring, I can't jump up and show you that. But you'll see, actually, he's got a nice little smart wrist on there, which has got his TV on there, and he's got his computer screen and everything there, and they're on the way to bowling, so they're checking out the other football scores. And so we've kind of moved away from the non-sophisticated. Are we moving to this? Is this what the future holds for us? What I was fascinated by this morning was there was a presentation which showed the buying public of tomorrow. And we're talking now, if we'd have had this conference 20 years ago and asked what it would be like today, we wouldn't have even got close. And so we're talking about how much information and how much connectivity and how this is going to be represented in another 10, 20 years. And the fact of the matter is, you know what? Could we have one of these? There is one. There's one flying around Russia. That's it. But it's not a car. It's a drone. And some kids have actually, as a university project in Moscow, have built the Back to the Future car, and they have it flying all around Russia with everything involved in it to make it function. So we're moving from Fred and Barney to Michael J. Fox and Doc Brown. But reality, this is what I think we're going to be moving towards, what I've seen, and the autonomous vehicle and the public shared autonomous vehicles. I don't personally, and this is my opinion, it's not that of GEODIS, I don't think that it's going to involve anything other than growth for our industry. I keep getting told by a number of people who are outside our industry that as we start to have public and shared autonomous vehicles, then what's going to happen is there's going to be less vehicles produced because people are going to share them. I kind of think we're going to do that as well. And Michael quite rightly said that you use your car about 5% of the time. Well, how many's in this room? 120, 140 people not using their cars for the day. Most of us have probably got them parked in an airport somewhere for a number of days. That 5% is looking very big for this particular week. But no, he's absolutely right. It's the desire behind it to actually to share vehicles. I can see there being a desire behind it, particularly in finite resources on the planet. But the strides are being made to make them finite resources different, to make them better, to make them go further, to find different ways of moving vehicles. There's actually 6 million Teslas have been produced now and sold. And that sounds an awful lot, unfortunately, when you realize that that accounts for less than half of 1% of the vehicles sold in that period of time. I said Teslas, I did not mean Teslas. It was the Toyota. The amount of vehicles that's being used in shared vehicles for future is going to be something in the region, I believe, of under 1% at the start. And I think by 2025, 2030, I think it's still going to be substantially under 1% too. Because I think that these are something that's going to be to have as well. But if you've got a shared vehicle and you need an emergency access to a vehicle, you're not really going to be wanting to go looking for it. So on that note, I will leave it for you to ask questions of the panel. And thank you for listening. And now you just have your questions away from the buses. So thanks very much, guys. How could I say Tesla?
Thank you very much, Mark, for that overview. Interesting thoughts there on the development of the internet and what it means for cars. Thanks to you and your colleagues for coming here, even at the expense or at the cost of your wife's birthday. We have been trying to figure out ways to get you to stop coming to our conferences, and obviously the scheduling isn't working, so we'll have to think about something else for next time. No, but seriously, thank you very much for those insights. Thanks to all of our panelists for their great presentations. I'd like to open it up to the floor now for some questions. I can start, or if there's any question, just raise your hand. We've got mics going around, and you can say your name and company. So you're all obviously starting to think about that cocktail, that beer that's coming up in fairly shortly. So I'm going to have to make you wait a little bit longer, I'm afraid. I'd like to start, and it sort of connects a little bit to maybe what Mark was alluding to there. He obviously expressed some optimism about what the industry is going and what this technology might mean. At our conference in Detroit last year, Brad Jacobs, who's the chief executive of XPO, he talked about that he does fear, for example, that one day an app could threaten his business, that maybe whether it's automation or whether it's online bidding or various things like that, that some of this technology that we're talking about harnessing might well cost us jobs. And I just perhaps wanted to throw the question to the panel about whether you see the things that we're kind of discussing here as disruptions that could be costly to your business or really fully as opportunities. I know it's a sort of a wide range there, but maybe we can start with Michael.
Yeah, thank you. We see sort of those type of technologies, if we took online auctions, for example, as being ways that you can actually optimize and actually minimize waste. One of the things which we tend to do in supply chain is that you have a number of different types of flows. And there are certain flows which could be full truckload movements that are pretty simple to schedule, that these type of applications are relevant and they can be really useful and they can actually give you visibility in terms of capacity that can actually be linked together to give better prices. So we see it as an opportunity, these types of technologies. I think where you've just got to be a little bit careful. I think sometimes if you try to oversimplify a supply chain and try to commoditize all of the elements, sometimes some of the issues of linking it together and a problem call somewhere, because obviously if you're looking at inbound to manufacturing, the cost of keeping the factory moving, the cost of it not getting parts in the right time, typically will negate any savings that you might be able to get in terms of procuring on a commodity type basis. So it is a balance, but there's definitely a place for it. And we see it as the digital technologies and things. We see them as really quite exciting, and we use them ourselves.
Okay. Anyone else from the panel want to comment on that? You don't have to.
No.
All right, well, we can leave it there.
Chris, sorry, I was waiting for you, Michael.
Okay.
I would agree with what Michael says on that. But what we're finding as well, and we're also in the same position. I think we'll probably all get the information from TI and the various bids that come down the line there. And you get the Friday afternoon when your email is just completely flooded with a couple of hundred of these every week. And I think that the technology is improving, but I still think it's an addition right now, but it's a ways to go. I personally don't see it as a threat. I see it as a complementary area to the businesses. And I think it's an area that what it actually does do is it works for a lot of us working together. And if you actually look at some of the online bids from that, particularly through TI, you'll actually see a lot of us reaching out to our competitors for them to bid on, to support our own processes.
Thank you. Michael, with the ECMR, we talked about, you mentioned 8 or 9 countries only implementing it. What's really holding it back right now? Is it a lack of will at the government level, or is it in fact companies that aren't really pushing enough for it? So carriers or OEMs or whatever maybe need to push their own governments. What's really holding it back?
So I didn't catch the beginning.
Oh, sorry, the question was to Michael, the other Michael, sorry. I'll have to distinguish that.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because the one said, okay, we are not pushing too much. The other one said, you can't push too much because of the problems that not all the member states have the same understanding. So normally we have the technical possibilities and we need to use this, and we should use them in order to make our work a bit easier. But we need the legal security in order to do the right things. So we try to push with the European Commission to influence the different member states to ratify this protocol and to also to accept the other regulations. But sometimes some member states said, okay, to the industry, you can start and then we will see what will be the outcome. But this is, for the logistical point of view, is not possible, from the side of the logistical provider is not possible, because this is too unsafe and too risky to in case of court proceedings, to pay a lot of money because you are not on the safe side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Any questions from the audience at this time? Now you're all quite tired now, I can tell. Okay, a few more questions from my side. Mark, maybe starting with you. I mean, you raised the self-diagnostics that the car is currently able to do and probably will increasingly be able to do. Do you kind of envision a time when this will kind of feed directly, in a sense, through the supply chain, whether back to OEMs, even to logistic providers, suppliers, in terms of triggering how inventory is managed and ordered? Or do you think that's a step kind of too far in terms of privacy and other kind of issues?
No, I don't see that as a step too far at all. I think it's a natural evolution. I think it's a natural progression. I even see it going a little bit further. I think that the communication of the diagnostics within a car, I think what you'll find is it's be able to actually communicate with the cars around it too. So if you've got an engine performance issue and you're coming up to something, I can see a time in the future when your car will be told that you're approaching a slow-moving vehicle, which is not got the capacity to do this, as a warning. And I think that that's a smart natural progression too. If, of course, the software providers will work together to put that across a standardization. The other thing with that as well is we're already getting told today when the car has a fault and you can see that it's going to be coming when it's going to be developing faults, and that's going to move back up the fault line, so it's actually going to get information about the fault is developing rather than the fault is there. And so I think that that'll be a natural progression too, which again would go into the supply chain, to a dealer, to wherever you have your car serviced. And I think that becomes great for us guys as well, because then we know in advance when we're going to have to be moving product to them.
Mm-hmm. And to English, Michael, this time. You raised in your presentation, you talked about some data mining that DHL can and is doing to make improvements in the supply chain. And I just wondered, in terms of collecting that data, either is DHL building it itself? Is it getting data from its from its customers? And if so, how open are these customers to sort of sharing this data for these systems?
Yeah, so typically we collect data through our warehouse management systems, and we've got the ability to, in terms of providing the services, sort of generate lots of information. And what we're finding now is that by taking that information and looking at it intelligently, we're able to start making better management decisions in terms of what we should be doing with our supply chain, be it inventory levels, be it frequency of replenishments, be it where we put stock. And we see you guys as potential customers, I think you see that as what we should be doing. We should be looking at your supply chain and coming back and giving you suggestions in terms of how it should be optimized. I think it was last year, Louis was up here on a panel, and there was a little bit of a debate that was going on in terms of what should the providers of these logistics services be doing, and that was one of the things that we were told to do, but we do it, but sometimes we just got to make it a little bit more visible. So it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another point also that you alluded to, skills and the importance to develop skills, and obviously that's something we discussed right on this stage last year. With all these changes, I mean, it's so dramatic in some ways, the technology that's coming in. I mean, to keep up with it, how robust within your organizations do you think your own training for staff, or to keep people kind of in tune with these new technologies that are coming in?
It's key. People, for us, is everything. Employees, skill base, how people provide services is just a fundamental type of thing. We have a program in our business which is called CSCS, which stands for Certified Supply Chain Specialist. And we're basically going for a program for every one of DHL's employees of bringing them up to speed in terms of what we do as a business, our values, and how we're trying to provide services for our customers. It's most really one of the largest global employee engagement programs that's been carried out, but it's all about people. It's all about making sure that when people touch DHL as a business, and the trouble with being a large business, there's lots of different touch points, like there are for you guys as OEMs, that we have a consistent approach and we can basically develop our skills. And developing those skills is going to be a range of developing them in-house, in terms of training, in terms of mentoring, but also in terms of acquiring new skills and recruiting people in new geographies. Yeah. But you're quite right. People, recruitment, it is really important. And a former colleague who's sitting a few rows back raised this. It was a really good speech last year. Is the skills gap. There are certain geographies where we have gaps in skills, and you guys, as I said before, you must have recruitment issues, which I think this is just trying to get the publicity, isn't it? I think the automotive industry is a fantastic industry to work in. Gives you lots of challenges. I was speaking to Louis yesterday afternoon on it, and it's how do we encourage young people from universities and things to come into the industry, and maybe just get a little bit more of a mix. And when I look at the audience, we could do with some new people, isn't it? We need a balance and bring more people into it. So it's good.
So just to requote, Michael's tired of all of you. It's time to we have to refresh our audience for next year. It's not to do with the speakers. It's actually the audience we need to update.
May I add some point? So everything what Michael just said is completely correct. It's also valid for the BLG. So the education and to make people aware and to educate them is not the big issue. But as much as electronic devices you use, as more transparent you will become. So everywhere and everyone where the guys are and what they are doing, and you can really figure out every single step of the work. And this brings the Labor Council and so on the discussion that we cannot go into the privacy of every different employee, and this is, I think, the more difficult discussion as to educate the people.
Yeah, to add to what's being said here, I think that working within the supply chain industry, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where kids are going to school and making their career choices, and their teens, and they go from wanting to be a footballer or a rock star, they then go to wanting to be a lawyer or a doctor because there's a lot of money in that. And then they they don't sort of dream of working in logistics and working in supply chains, because they just kind of presume that all of the things that they buy get there. And I think that as a body, as an industry, that we really need to be better at self-promoting, particularly in certain areas of the world where there is definitely totally agree, Michael. There's a talent gap in some markets, and I think that the other thing is, whilst companies like ourselves and DHL and others, internal talent, when you find them people and when you recognise them, they don't necessarily start within the automotive side of your logistics business. They may start in a different division, and then as they're coming through as future young leaders, and there tends to be a scramble within the business itself to try and get them into the to your side of the business. And I think it's for us, certain markets it is more challenging than others. But I think that the training and that we're able to provide, you don't want to lose them when you start to put that sort of investment in. And sometimes you feel actually it's not necessarily what they're worth and what you're paying them. It's actually what it's going to cost you to replace them.
Yep. Okay, I think some quite important points raised there about recruitment, about retention, and training, particularly in the context of technology, but also as this industry grows and evolves and develops. I think that's a nice point at which we can end that discussion before we move on to our live voting. I would, before I do that, just like to thank our panel once again for their presentations and discussion. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we're going to do some live voting now via our app. So just a reminder now, this is how you sign on, as I mentioned earlier. Please go to the link. Use your email address and your delegate badge number, which is on your badge. Just a little note for those of you watching this live from outside the room. This isn't relevant for the people in the room, obviously. There is a slight delay between when I speak and what's actually and the voting. So if you don't listen to what I say, as if you were anyway, but you can go to the polling tab and you'll see the questions and answer the questions as you see them come up. So that way you'll actually be able to vote in time with us. So just ignore me, as I'm sure you've done all day. Whilst you're getting logged on there, because I know it takes a couple minutes to do, just again a little highlights for tonight. We'll have coaches starting to leave directly after this session. We'll have a couple of buses going to the hotel where we'll have our dinner. It'll go until 9 or so, and we've got buses to obviously take you back. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the original Stig from Top Gear, who will be giving a kind of a guest presentation or speech during dinner for some entertainment there. As I can kind of vaguely hear, I probably should have noted that whilst you're logging on, don't necessarily play the live streaming. I know you think it'd be really cool to see me in 2 places at once, but it'll probably crash our systems, and I think that's too much of me for anyone to kind of handle, to be honest. So just, avoid that screen. Also, a little reminder about your evaluation forms. So please do fill them in either tonight if you're leaving before then, or keep it until the end, so you can obviously give us feedback across more of the conference and more of what you've participated in, because we really value your input on that. So I hope by now those of you who are going to participate, which I hope is most of you, have been able to log on, and we can shortly start if we're ready in the back. We'll start with our voting. So these questions were supplied by some of our sponsors, some of our gold and global sponsors. And our first question is from DHL. So the question is, what is your top supply chain priority for the next 12 to 18 months? Is it bold, resilient planning? Is it increasing agility and response? Is it improving visibility? Is it using data to make more accurate predictions? Or is it increasing LLP services, lead logistic provider services? So if we'll give you a little bit of time to make your selection. You can only choose once. So please vote now. That's a pretty unanimous result there. I'm not going to say that I don't have my doubts about it, but I think that there seems to be obviously improving agility and response is what you all apparently are doing right now, every single one of you. So take that for what it is. We'll try to do this further, see if we're actually working. Our next question is supplied by Priority Freight, and the question is, what is most important when selecting a logistics provider? Is it cost? Is it on-time performance? Is it sustainability? Is it ability to track and trace? Or is it flexibility? So please try to vote now. Okay, sometimes you have to admit when there's some technical issues, right? And let's not kind of just barrel against, you can admit when something's gone a little bit wrong. We'll reboot this and we'll start it, we'll kick it off tomorrow or something like that. We'll try and bring it back. We've obviously had a little bit of a technical, which is kind of probably appropriate for a session which we're talking about digital futures. So maybe the risk of system failure or the risk of hacking, as perhaps we're being hacked at the moment. Who knows? It could be anything that's happening. There's lots of risks involved. So we'll give that another crack. Sorry about that. It is obviously interesting to get your feedback, and we will endeavor to do it as soon as we sort out the system's issues. Okay, well, the good news for you is that it's time for beer and for wine and for the gala dinner. So if you can, we're going to start with our coaches leaving fairly soon afterwards. You can obviously drop stuff off in the room if you want, but please, as quickly as you can, start making your way to the front, and we will have a great evening. So see you there. Thank you.